So we got a Beijing bombshell. Looks like the clearest images yet of the J-XDS, also known as the J-50, coming out of China. Check out this image right here. The one on the bottom has obviously been smoothed out and AI enhanced. The one at the top there is the actual image that's been released. So I'm going to talk about these as if they're real. We don't know yet if it's AI or not, but it just makes it more fun when I talk about it like they're real. So check this thing out. You can see the tailless design. I'm going to get into all of that throughout this video. The thing that's really interesting to me is the single pilot configuration. Very interesting. And then I know what you're all wondering, what does J-XDS actually stand for? Well, I'm pretty sure it stands for the J extra deep and satisfying. But to me, these images are really cool, and I think they tell us a ton. So stay to the end of the video because I have about a dozen of these images and renderings that I'll be covering, and I'll be giving you the most up-to-date information on the J-XDS, the J-50, and then check out this video of the flight controls and how they're potentially going to work on the J-XDS. This video is super fun to watch, and I'll be breaking it down fully about 2/3 of the way through the video, so definitely stay for that. And if that wasn't enough, act now, and I'm actually going to add in a bonus extra part at the very end of the video of 3 potential scenarios where this J-XDS could be seen in combat and how the US would likely counter it. And then throughout the video, I'll be answering, is this actually a legit 6th gen jet, or is it just a cheap knockoff of the F-22? And I'll be telling you specifically why it could be more of a knockoff of the F-22 than everybody thinks. But then I gotta give credit to China. This jet does look fierce. It's got that diamond-shaped nose, which I really like. It's got a seamless canopy, looks like for one pilot, and then it's got that trapezoidal intakes, looks like a divertless supersonic inlet, and that type of tech allows for smooth, high-speed airflow. It's also got an electro-optical targeting system under the nose, and we can see that in these images. So to me, that suggests that it's probably going to be used for a multi-role type situation. It's got those side bay bulges on the side of the intakes there that make it look like those could be used for some sort of extra air inlets, or maybe even some sort of infrared suppressing. But what's the big draw of this thing? The thing that makes it completely different that we can see in this first image here, and to me it's those swiveling wingtips. You can see they're angled down. This thing's kind of sitting there, maybe it's getting ready to taxi, so they're not in an upward position that might be used while it's in flight. They're actually angled down a little bit, so I'll be getting more into why it has those things. But here's the big thing. She's a big girl. The J-XDS is hefty, about the size roughly about of an F-15. It's got a 70-foot wingspan, so to me this makes me think it's used for long-range missions. But some people have been questioning, is this just a mock-up because we haven't seen this exact jet, this exact J-XDS flying. There's been other images of previous prototypes that have been flying around, but nothing with this engine setup, that 2D thrust vectoring setup doesn't look very similar to that. So could it be a mock-up? Sure, but again, it's more fun if we talk about it like this thing's gonna go up there and try to compete with an F-35 or an F-22, or hey, maybe even an F-47. That's just more fun. And hey, what do I always say? Remember, have fun, and sometimes you gotta just do it for the story. And to me, the images look relatively convincing. So if it is legit, this is a major step for China's 6th gen ambitions, but we gotta keep our eyes sharp because China has been known to pull a fast one. Just a time or two though. So the J-XDS, what is its goal? Or its ultimate goal is to outshine 5th gen jets like the Chinese J-20 and even go up against 5th gen jets like the F-35 and F-22. So you got that tailless lambda wing design, and that is mainly built to cut radar signature. China is really moving forward on trying to cut down their radar signature. They saw what happened in Iran with the B-2s going through. They see the US designing the F-47 and the B-21, and they want to be on the same page with that very extremely low radar signature jet. They're probably trying to get this thing somewhere around the size of a hummingbird on a radar, and that could potentially rival the top stealth jets in the world right now. So if the engineering is solid, they might be onto something. But those wings, when I look at those things, the smooth flow of those wings, I would guess that this thing has super cruise, probably hitting Mach 1.5 without using its afterburners, and it's going to need that for the long swaths of the Pacific Ocean missions. And then let's go to the next image, image 2. So the twin engine design with those sleek nozzles, to me it's the 2D thrust vectoring that the F-22 has. I mean, this is pretty much cut and paste F-22 look-alike right here. But why is it not a 3D thrust vectoring solution like what we've seen on the Su-57? Well, likely China has learned, as well as Russia's learned the hard way, by trying to have a 3D 3D thrust vectoring system, you really complicate maintenance and you don't gain a ton, because that 2D thrust vectoring is extremely effective in pitch, and then you just throw in some massive flight controls. Like this thing's got a massive wing, it's got those wingtip flight controls, so now you can actually get that 3D maneuvering with just the flight controls. You would reduce your maintenance costs and time by about half, because you're not dealing with that 3D, and the way that that moves is so complex. So this would create some serious agility while allowing the maintenance to be relatively manageable. And China's just learned that by seeing the F-22, and then they see that the US doesn't even have thrust vectoring on the F-35. And so it's clear that there's things that are likely more important than thrust vectoring. But is anything really more important than maneuverability at an air show, guys? I mean, I'm a former F-15E combat fighter pilot, F-16 Thunderbird pilot, and to me, you know, if you're gonna build a jet, you gotta make sure that it can be good at air shows as well. Like I always say, you wanna sound cool on the radio and you wanna have fun, you wanna enjoy yourself. So to me, what's more enjoyable than a 3D thrust vectoring jet? China, you kind of missed the ball on that one. And speaking of maneuverability, those wingtip flight controls, maneuverability is where the J-XDS could actually shine, in my opinion, if it lives up to the actual buzz of what these things can do. So tailless jets are naturally unstable, but those swiveling wingtips that we see in this image right here, they can act as dynamic flight control surfaces that can really help maintain stability during dogfights or high angles of attack maneuvering, which typically happens during dogfights, but even coming into land when you're flying at slow speeds, you need something to keep you stable. So the flight control computers in this thing are going to be working overtime, but to me, it can get some of that dynamic stability back without having the tails by having those flight controls on the wingtips. And if they are considering bringing this thing onto a carrier, those flight control wingtips, you got to have some way to get this thing to maneuver extremely well at slow airspeeds, kind of like the F-18 does. So perhaps that allows them to do that as well. And as we zoom in on those wingtips, it looks like they pivot on a central hinge. They shift somewhere around 45 degrees, potentially in any direction, and that allows you to control pitch, yaw, and roll from the wingtip, which is different. It's definitely different than the standard ailerons. So to me, these things would provide a yaw-like rudder without the vertical tails, and they could keep the radar signature low without having the tail. And then in high angle maneuvering, they're going to angle down to potentially boost the lift. And what that does is it will delay stalls when you're at those extreme angles of attack. They could work as speed brakes. So if they tilted back, or if they just went completely counter to the airflow, they could literally make you fall like a rock. And that might be extremely helpful when you're doing some sort of advanced Cobra maneuver. Maybe now this thing is going to be called the JDX maneuver after these things. Since this is kind of new territory, a little bit of an untested flight control surface, if they're not able to get those things to work extremely well and sync up seamlessly, now you've just got a liability on your hands. And the glitches that could be seen with this new type of flight control system is going to bring risks as well. So this is not without its risks. This is cool having all these images come out with these wingtips showing this new flight control system. But again, you're kind of reinventing the wheel, which, hey, I'm all about innovation, but you got to be very precise to make sure these sync up seamlessly with all the different flight control systems. But again, if they've got it right, this could definitely shine in a dogfight. I mean, I think versus the F-22, the thrust vectoring that you would see in an F-22, it would pummel this thing just based on the ability of the F-22 to have more stability in that dogfight. But hey, I guess it remains to be seen, and we're going to get to those scenarios here in a second. Now let's jump back into some of those images from X. So image 4 here, you can see basically the flush flow of this jet. To me, it looks really sweet. I mean, it looks like something from the future, which I like, and I like how flat it goes from the outside of the fuselage up into the canopy, and then it goes to a canopy that doesn't have a canopy bow on the outside. It looks like there's some sort of bow inside, maybe a slight canopy bow. It's hard to tell, but to me it does look like a flush canopy and no HUD. So I think the HUD not being there is huge, because that means they've got some sort of 360-degree aperture system that's giving them some sort of situational awareness. So that's a big step forward for the Chinese. I mean, basically that's matching, trying to get close to where the F-35 is at. And then again, the way that the flow of the fuselage from the canopy goes off, it just looks sweet. I like that flow. It looks really good. Okay, and here's some renderings that I found on X. It's actually really cool. It's a well done rendering here. This one actually has the HUD, but as you can see, single cockpit configuration. You can see the flow of those engines. Again, how the intakes basically bend. So instead of an S, it's basically just like a divertless system that keeps radar waves from going in, bouncing off the engines, and then going back to adversary aircraft. And then you can see the weapons bay, highlighted really well underneath there. So, I mean, it's really cool to see. These graphics are neat because I think it kind of shows the simplicity of what this thing could be. Is it actually this simple? I mean, there's probably so many more actuators that we don't see in this rendering itself, but I think it gives us a really good idea of what the J-XDS is. And here's that rendering from the back end there. Very cool to see just the way the exhaust flows. Definitely very similar to the F-22, but again, when I look at the engines on this, and it's very similar to the actual picture we saw of that engine, I'll throw that up here as well. It's a little bit bulky, so very similar to the Su-57, whereas to me, the F-22, the way that that metal is formed, the titanium, the other metals that are used, just make it very thin and sleek and light. And to me, this is gonna be a very heavy jet, so if it's heavy right off the bat, you would want those two wheels in the front, kind of like what we've seen on this thing. And again, if it's a carrier-based aircraft, you're gonna want those two wheels on that single truck in the front to give the weight more ability to spread out on the nose gear. So heavy aircraft, and again, when you have bulky engines like that, that just speaks to me about, hey, the rest of the aircraft, maybe the composites and carbon fiber in this thing just can't compete with the F-22 or Western jets, and that's just an evolution that China will have to deal with and get to, and that's likely why these engines look bulkier. And with more weight, now you've just got less of an ability to carry heavier weapons. So as soon as you start adding bulk to the airframe, like what I see here, now it's just going to reduce the amount of weapons that you can carry, which is obviously not ideal. You want to bring the biggest sticks and the most sticks possible to the fight. So I think the size of these engines there is going to limit that a little bit. And here's a cool top-down view so you can see the flow of those engines, kind of how they bend up and then go back. So that's a really cool depiction there, showing you the flow of the air, how they're going to make their way into those different chambers of the engine and then flow out. And then the thing I like about this top-down view that we see here is you can really see how they did a pretty decent job of allowing the radar waves to bounce off of the jet. It's just a very smooth aircraft, seamless blending into the canopy. I really like that. I think the US F-47 is going to have similar flows that we see here. But again, if you want a stealth jet and you want a very maneuverable platform, you're going to have to do some things that we haven't seen before. And I think China's making their best attempt at that. And speaking of stealth, when you look at the side profile here, this is another rendering as well, but it looks very similar to what we saw before. In the images that we see now, the pitot boom in the front is removed. This image up at the top has that pitot boom there, but again, for testing, that might have just been something that they needed to have on there. But then on the new images that we see, it doesn't have that. So they've somehow integrated it if in fact that is a flying aircraft. And again, a lot of the test jets will have pitot tubes like that protruding from the aircraft because they're not really concerned about combat yet, right? They're more concerned about making sure the air data sensors and everything in the jet actually makes sense, so the thing doesn't fall out of the sky. Sorry, F-35, too soon. And here's just a close-up of the cockpit with another rendering. Looks very similar. This one has the two-seat configuration, which for all you Wizzos or Rio lovers out there, that's me, F-15E. I had a Wizzo with me at all times in that thing. I loved having that configuration, the combat multiplication that I felt from that, and just the way that I could BS with someone. More importantly, we could just sit up there and chat when things got boring. That was huge. But this is a rendering of that two-place cockpit, but the new images that we're seeing are kind of definitively showing a single seat placement of the cockpit, single seat fighter jet. And when you think of how things might be intertwined with AI, I don't know how advanced China's integration is going to be with CCAs right off the bat. It's probably going to take them a few years to get up to the speed of the United States when it comes to integrating with the CCAs. Maybe having the single place cockpit makes sense because you could run a lot of those CCAs from the ground. So it's kind of like you would have your Wizzo on the ground helping you run the CCAs or manage other tasks. So having them up there in the jet with you might not be the best situation. And then that way they're not under G. They're actually down at 1G. That's what we call it when you're sitting on the earth. We're all sitting here at 1G. If you're Wizzo, let's say you got 4 or 5 Wizzos that are sitting there under 1G, they're making decisions that, let's just say, don't involve the nervous system as much. So their little pink body is not in danger of getting blown up like yours is when you're a fighter pilot up in that jet and you see, AIM 260 massive telephone pole-sized missiles flying at you from an F-47. That's going to be, it's going to throw you off your game just a little bit. So having the Wizzo on the ground to actually operate those might actually be more of a combat efficient situation. Okay, and then another cool rendering of the jet from the front. And to me, again, you just see that nice flow, that seamless flow. This is obviously an ideal situation. You basically have 0 seams on the jet. That'd be China's wet dream right there, and any pilot's wet dream who's up there going up against radars that are trying to detect it and shoot it down. And then the J-XDS, that Joint Extra Deep System, looks like a serious weapons platform to me. It's got those side-by-side bays that to me they look like they could carry long-range range missiles, I would say somewhere between 4 and 6, even carrying potentially hypersonic missiles, and those things could probably launch from somewhere about 200 miles out. That seems to be about the norm for the latest hypersonic missiles. And then it's got a lower bay as well that might hold 2 other air-to-air missiles, or maybe some precision bombs for taking out radar sites or doing some type of multi-role missions. And to me, strafing and doing things with the gun and jets like this, a lot of people are probably going to say, well, why does it even have that? To me though, as a fighter pilot, if you're going to build a jet that has a person in it, let's just have a gun, because at the end of the day, if everything goes haywire, let's say your avionics all go down, I just think it's smart to have a gun if you're going to have a person in there. If there's no person in there, like, okay, we're going to risk the fact of not having a gun. I can understand that. But as long as we're putting pilots in jets, I'm speaking to the Air Forces all around the world, can we just make sure it has a gun, please? All right, so we got to get to the part where we talk about this thing, comparing it to an F-22 or a Western jet. So to me, the J-XDS, it clearly carries influences from the West. Those thrust vectoring nozzles, to me, they look very similar, if not as identical as possible to the F-22. So could those be linked to the rumors that there were hacked blueprints from the F-22 and the F-35 in the 2010s? Yeah, likely that for sure. And then those intakes, to me, the flow of those, they're definitely copying the design of the F-35, which has the S intakes. Those are just a little bit different with going from down to up, whereas the F-35s just go from side to side like that, like an S. Really cool rendering here. You can see how sleek the airframe is, just the flow of radar waves across that. But even from the side, I can start to see elements of the F-22. Do you see it? You see any elements of the F-22? This looks differentiated with that lambda design, just more wing area than what you would see on the F-22, so that's slightly different. But when I look at the front and the way that the radar waves would flow off, definitely has F-22 zest to me, and I just like saying zest, so hope you guys enjoy it as much as I do. There you go, you can see there that flat part, and interestingly enough, now you see those flight control surfaces, which aren't exactly the same as what we've seen on the flying versions, but not too far off. And then you can see on the ends there, those would be some sort of flaperons to me, and you almost have elevators in the inner part closer to the engines, but then those flaperons to me are going to give you a lot of control authority. And then there, they just folded up those elevators, and look, you know, that to me is basically an F-22. Basically, you just fold up the elevators, and now you've got an F-22 on your hands. I mean, very similar to the F-22 with some slight differences, but as you can see right there, they're mimicking what the F-22 is likely going to do. Whether those things will actually pop up or not when it comes to the actual production version of the J-XDS, that remains to be seen, but you can kind of see what they did, right? Maybe just flopping those down, you break those into a few different parts like what we've seen on some of the flying test versions, and they're probably trying to see, can they keep those down? Can they maybe make those movable? Can those things move during different regimes of flight to give it more stability, stay at like a dogfight or lower airspeeds? Can those just pop up next to the engines there, and now you've got a vertical tail that's similar to what the F-22 has? So as you can see, very similar elements to me, and then you've got that 2D thrust vectoring system with a system that looks very similar to what the F-22 has, and I think you've got some strong elements of the F-22 on your hands. This is what everybody has been waiting for, and hopefully we don't see this anytime soon. But let's say China launches J-20s as the leading edge. The US would respond with F-35s and potentially B-21s that would be based in Kadena. But then China launches its trump card, 6 J-XDSs climbing up to 60,000 feet, using their electro-optical system to try to sweep in and take out adversary fighters. F-22s counter by launching out of Kadena, ready to fire as soon as possible. Losses would be had on both sides, but let's say in this scenario, a J-XDS gets into a dogfight with an F-22. Likely both sides are going to try to fire infrared missiles at each other to try to take down the other jet as soon as possible. But let's say those miss, and now it's a dogfight. To me, this is really going to depend on the low-speed maneuverability of that J-XDS. Can it actually turn and burn with an F-22? The fight's on, the F-22 unleashes an AIM-9X, and the J-XDS is going to do everything they can to flare it off. Now, can both sides actually get gun tracks on each other? It comes down now to the skill of the pilots. How much proficiency does that J-XD pilot have? Have they been practicing dogfights? Are they able to maneuver that jet at slow speeds? Can they bring up those control surfaces to give it more stability and now mimic the F-22? If they can, now you've pretty much got an F-22 versus F-22 situation, and it's really up to who is the better pilot. And in this case, it all depends. Who has more reps, who has more skill and more practice with their weapon systems. That's what's going to determine who wins this fight. I'll see you on this video right here. And also, the last thing I'll say is there's a link now for the podcast that I'm on. I'm doing a podcast with a Navy SEAL, Mike Hall, and a nervous system expert, Hugh Vale. So check that out. I'll link to that in the description. I'll see you on that video. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, also known as the fighter pilot next door, signing off.